born in London and trained as a dancer, and I now teach dance, choreograph, do a little bit of filmmaking myself. I moved to Cardiff in the early 80s, worked with Moving Being Theatre Company, and I've stayed here ever since. And my parents are from Grenada in the West Indies. That's both my parents. Of course, they're mixed as well. So, but yeah. My first memories. I think my first memories would be at school. I mean, I had quite a happy childhood, but I remember school being an interesting. When I think back, I still have visual memories of me standing in the middle of the playground, and this is in the nursery, and lots of children pushing prams. I think in those days the girls used to play in one playground and the boys in another. So it was the bell would ring, and suddenly we'd all run out to the playground and we'd all try and grab a pram, but I'd be the only child that didn't get a pram. And it seemed to be like a constant thing. And I remember that I had to I just remember this feeling that I wanted to get hold of a pram, that I did get hold of one, and it was snatched off me by another child. And when the bell rang for me to go in, that was the only time I went to get the pram, and then I would be met with a teacher who had a kind of frown on her face, and I kind of knew that was, it's time to go in. So there's a sense of being alone, being isolated, or standing and watching others play. But I didn't feel lonely, but it was just this kind of looking at others. But the theme about the pram has always stayed with me, because even as I was growing up, and my parents didn't have a lot of money, and I always wanted a pram, and if we did have a pram I had to share it with my sister. And also the same thing, which is very strange, when I was pregnant with my daughter, again money was tight and I couldn't have the pram I wanted. So it's a really strange running theme. So I've often wanted to make a dance about that. A really happy one. I can't remember the other, obviously being too young, houses where I was, but we lived in Islington, and I remember the name of the streets, like 247 Liverpool Road. And it was a time when there were hardly any cars on the road. It was a wide street in London. And there was a lady called Kay, who was Irish, who used to look after us. And there was an African man called Osu, who used to live upstairs. And my sister and I used to love running upstairs, or in fact going to the top of the stairs and just playing with him, chatting with him. There was also another family there that we didn't like. And I think that's because it was the first time I think realised that maybe adults could be quite cruel to children. And I remember that my mum and dad used to sometimes leave us there, and the husband used to push us in the wardrobe. And then after a while, when I told my dad, he never let us go there again. And it was only because I wouldn't share our fruit, but he was quite gruff. And I do remember the wife being very quiet. So it was a kind of first sort of realization that sometimes adults weren't particularly nice to kids. So they're exposed to quite a lot as a kid, really. You kind of spent a time reading people's faces. If they smiled to you, that you were okay and safe, and if they were quite serious, you would keep away. It's interesting things it's kind of stayed with me anyway. Yeah, maybe school teachers yes. They're kind of things, well, because when I was quite young, I was bullied as well. I was about 5 years. In the same, the school was around the corner, and I was bullied, and I don't know how long for. And again, it was, to my surprise, it was like West Indian children. And when I look back, I understand why that happened, but at the time I didn't know why. And so, so there was that thing of looking at people's faces and reading them. Is it safe? Is it not? Are they welcoming? It's a constant thing that it kind of did, but it kind of protected me. You kind of knew. I think what when I look back now, I think what it was that there weren't many in my class. There weren't many black children. There might have been about 4 or 5 of us, but my mum used to make our clothes, and she was quite a perfectionist, and the teacher always used to comment on it oh, you know, what do you... And I think that's what it was, but that thing of being teacher's pet. And I can understand looking back now, if other children aren't made a fuss of, and maybe those two thought, oh, what's... And it's the natural thing. They want to be your friends, but if they're not your, you know, in your, if you're not part of that group, then you can get targeted. But it used to be, I remember the bell always going, and I would run around the playground, keep running until I was exhausted, and they would get hold of me, push me in the girls' toilets, and punch me and shove my head down the toilet, flush the chain. And I used to get a few other children in, and it must have went on for a while, because I remember my mum coming to pick me up from school, and I froze to the spot. We were crossing the road because the girl was there with her mother, and I couldn't move, and I just blurted it out then, and my mum had a word with the mother, and then it stopped. But I don't know why I never said anything. I think it's one of those things you think it's part of school, you just learn to cope with it. But I was about 5. And then we moved and went to another school, because we had to move to another area, because where we were living, the housing was quite poor. That was in the 60s, so yeah, it was quite a damp place. But we were happy. Apart from all that, we're happy, you know. Doors were always open in the streets. You can always go into other people's homes. I remember going into somebody else, made some friends with some kids on the street, and we went into their home, and I remember thinking, oh, their house is very different from ours. They've got a washing machine. We didn't have a washing machine. And they had a doll's house, and we didn't have as many toys. And getting on great with the kids until we saw the mother, and her face was really quite serious. And I thought, oh, she doesn't like us. And then we didn't play with them anymore. It's kind of stopped. But then my mum explained that, you know, that people won't like you because you're black, and they'll call you names, and you be proud when they call you names. You know, don't be ashamed. Just say you're proud to be black. And she gave us things to say. But I remember we just knew, okay, they're not speaking to us because of that's why. The children was fine. It seemed to be the parents. We never saw them again. So if we were playing outside, the mother didn't let them play. We didn't live next door. I remember it was quite a way down the street. But they seemed to be generally quite friendly. But then we never saw them again. Or we never played with them again. I think we were okay about it. I think you do as children. You just don't worry. You think, oh, okay, it's fine. Oh, right. Well, when we were quite young, not much. But I think when we moved to Highgate, and my dad was the one that instilled the chores in the house. I think because when he was young, I don't know what they called it then in Grenada, if it was like cadet training or army training or whatever. So he was the one that said, you know, get up in the morning, you've got to make your bed. And he'd have this thing about, well, getting us up in the morning. It would be, curtains would go on, the radio would go on, it would be rise and shine, and we would be like stunned into, it was quite awful really. So up you get, you know. He'd make sure we made our bed. My mum would make sure we ironed our clothes in those days. And that was usually on a Sunday. You'd iron your school clothes in preparation for the week, and our dad used to polish. He'd polish the shoes, and he'd polish his own, and then of course that was a novelty. So we'd like to polish our own shiny black shoes, and it was bright, you know, white socks, ankle socks. In winter, it was kind of knee length. And my mum was a house homemaker, so she was at home. But on Saturdays she'd work, and on Saturdays my dad would stay home. So then I remember he'd tie the curtains, which drove my mum mad. He'd tie the net curtains in a loose knot, and there would be more light in the house. And we'd help him polish the lino, so that would be like a kind of a dance. So we'd all get bits of cloths on our feet, and he'd put the music on, turn the gram up, and there'd be music playing, and we'd be there polishing the floor with him. We'd sweep up, make the beds. He'd do the washing. I think we'd try, but it was just, you know. So there was a kind of, routine. That was instilled. And we kind of did it, really. Yeah, we'd always have to tidy up. If we've made a mess with our toys, we didn't have a lot of toys, but if we made a mess, we'd have to tidy that back up. And there was always the dreaded thing about homework, even though there wasn't I remember even the holidays, if there wasn't any homework, he would make sure that we do our maths and learn our times tables and there would be the threat of a slipper. It'd be there. We wouldn't get smacked, but it would be there. And we'd have to recite poetry or something. So my dad was the kind of school headmaster kind of role, and he had quite a gruff, strict voice. But I hated maths because my dad was an accountant, and so he would instill that kind of thing. But I always felt like a failure because I was dreadful. Could never remember. Cardiff, because I trained after I finished my second year secondary school. I was lucky to get a place at Laban in London. Laban is a school for contemporary dance, 3 years in Lewisham in South London. And my husband, but he wasn't my husband then, was on the course there as well. And when we finished our 3-year dance training, he got work here. I happened to be with a youth dance group in London called Fusion, which was a predominantly black youth dance group, and we were performing. At that time, there was a big youth project travelling around the UK, and for the second year, it was going to be housed. It was going to be in Swansea, so I was going to Swansea, and my husband was with Moving Being Theatre Company. They were doing Dylan Thomas' Prospect of the Sea, I think it was, and that's how we kind of reconnected there. So that's how I came to Cardiff. I ended up visiting quite a few times, and then I got work with Dance Wales, which was based in Cardiff, and I ended up here. Wasn't going to be staying, but it was just going to be one of those things that you travel backwards and forwards, and that's how I ended up in Cardiff. And everyone kept saying, well, anyone who comes to Cardiff will end up staying. I thought, no, I'll always go back to London. But 30 years later, I'm still here. In my primary school in London, I used to speak really fast, and I used to walk badly, and my mum decided that I was going to go to elocution lessons and go to ballet classes. Didn't like the idea of elocution lessons, so somehow I managed to get out of not going there. But I went to ballet class, and I think because I was very hyper, always running around and overexcitable, and I liked the dance classes, and it was in our school anyway, so we were quite lucky. It was quite a nice school because we had a lot of, it seemed like a lot of media people sent their kids there. And so they had a swimming pool and they had a ballet school, after school kind of thing. So I went there and really enjoyed it, got involved. My sister and I got involved in a lot of the shows, and we were like the first 2 black children to be involved and given quite, nice juicy little roles. So I think that instilled more discipline, and it kind of improved the way that I was walking as well. So my heels were touching the floor instead of bouncing along. Did ballet, did point work, and then I had a terrible injury where I cracked my patella, so I couldn't dance anymore. But when I went to secondary school, there was contemporary dance there, and I thought I'd try that, to the horror of my ballet teacher, because they didn't tend to go together. You either did contemporary or ballet, but that was the only way I can continue dancing. And in the second year in our school, we were lucky to have my first black contemporary dance teacher, who's now a doctor, Dr. Maggie Semple. She's done really well in London, and she encouraged a lot of us to kind of pursue and do other projects that were to do with other schools in the area, where they invited music students and dance students. So I was quite, when I was doing dance, it was quite a good period in the 70s. A lot of young black kids were getting involved in the arts, because before it was just ballet, and you might have been the only black child or so. But so I was quite lucky. And so there were 2 separate things. So dance was in the school with Maggie Semple, and she got us involved in other projects. And then I went to another school not far from where I lived, where there were 2 teachers. One, they set up Weekends Art College in Kentish Town, which was, I suppose, like the first. What we have now, we have Stagecoach, which is like a performing arts, which is quite a commercial thing. But this was the first pilot and it was called Weekends Art College, and there was this guy from New York, I think, called Ed Bergman. He set up this project where kids can do from minority backgrounds, and maybe those that can't afford to go and do training in dance or any experience. So you did like 2 hours of drama, 2 hours of singing, 2 hours of jazz, dance. There were other things, and you'd also get people from West End if they had time to come in and get involved on short summer courses. And we even had, which is quite bizarre, and I hadn't realised, no, I can't remember his name now. He's a Welsh actor, patron. Ivor? Oh no, is there an Ivor? Not Ivor Novello, but there's another one, Ivor something. I can't remember his name. But anyway, he's a Welsh actor, and he was our patron. We got involved and so a lot of the kids from different parts of London, it's like maybe 90% of the kids were black. Then you have either Greek or Italian and white. So there were those two head teachers. They managed to get this going. So I was going to dance at school, and on the weekends I was going to Weekends Art College, and which was really empowering, because then you kind of met up with other kids going through the same thing, same sort of problems. You know, you're not being taken, not taken seriously at school, but you just didn't feel like you were getting very far, because, you know, for career projects, career development, they'd say things like, well, if you wanted to be a pilot, you couldn't do that. They were pushing you or encouraging you to be a nurse, bus driver, I don't know, you know, anything like modelling. I got told, and I'm sure she might have been Welsh in London, Mrs. Bebb, you know, when she asked me, what would you like to go? And I said, actually, I'd like to be a dancer. And she just looked at me and said, well, that's ridiculous. You're aiming to be the part of the top 20. Why don't you go into nursing? And I was totally shocked, because I thought the career development was there to help you and encourage you what you needed to do. And I just was stunned into silence. And in my head, I kept thinking, well, I'm just going to totally ignore what she's doing, because I'm actually being encouraged. Weekends Art College, they're actually telling us what we should do. They're actually giving us applications. And I thought, well, I'll just listen to what she has to say. And it might have been only 5 minutes in there. She said, is there anything else I could help you with? And I said, no, and I left. But I wish she was still alive today, because I could go back to her and say, actually, dear, I'm doing this now. But, so I was really shocked. So that was of no help. But I'm really glad that I was with this Weekends Art College, because then there were a few other students that were filling out applications, and I happened to be passing by, and I said, well, what are you doing? He said, oh, we're applying for Laban, and, you know, and I said, what do you need for qualifications? I said, well, just practical experience if you haven't got your O-levels or A-levels. And I did really badly in my O-levels. I only had GCSE for my dance, and O-level for my art, and everything else I failed, because coming from my mum and dad weren't getting on very well. I didn't do very well at school, so that didn't help. And I was just like blown away. So I thought, got the application form, filled that out, spoke to my dance teacher. She kind of had a look at it, and then we sent it off, and I went for my auditions, and I got through. And the only person that asked in my school, because I went to Parliament Hill School for girls, what was I doing when I left, was the deputy head teacher, and I was really surprised. She said, and her name was Mrs. Matioda, and she said, what were you doing? And I said, I've got a place at Laban, and she was really happy, and I was surprised, because I used to do dance performances for school assembly. I was very shy at school. I wouldn't say boo to a goose. I was, you know, I wouldn't say I was at the bottom, but I was just there. I was invisible. But when it came to performances at school, Mrs. Semple would always make sure that there was a dance event, and I would get up and I'd be doing solo dances since from the age of, 18 or 19, but I was really not surprised, I wasn't shy. I would get up and dance, but if I had to get up and speak, I wouldn't do that. I was very good at athletics, so I was, I'd do things like that. But apart from that, I was invisible. And funny enough, my maths teacher, Mr. Redfern, and I was at the bottom level at maths. He always used to kind of help, when I say help me, try and encourage. And I wouldn't say I was in the remedial group, but it was the bottom group where some of the kids had problems attending school, or they had problems, or had anger management problems. There were a few of us that were useless at maths, and he had a very good way. He was a very quiet teacher, but he had a very good way of trying to get us motivated. And he'd have these point systems that if we achieved something, there would be a prize at the end of term. And the prize at the end of term, I managed to get one, there's about 9 of us, was that we'd go somewhere. And I couldn't believe it. And all the people looked at me because they thought, it's definitely for you, June. We all got to go to a West End musical to see Chorus Line. It was quite embarrassing because I suddenly thought, well, he could have chosen something else, but why dance? So there we go. But that was really, really good. And I remember seeing my first dance production. I thought, oh my gosh. But everyone enjoyed it because, you didn't get to go out much anywhere. So, yeah. So it was a good school. Well, apart from school, being quite lucky, the third year at Laban Centre, our year were chosen to, when the Pope came to Cardiff. That was quite strange coming in. When they came to Cardiff, the Pope was the Pope was doing his usual papal visit and was going to be at the, where is it called now? It's not Sophiagon, it's in Riverside. They've knocked down their football... Ninian Park, that's it. So it was there that they'd staged the Pope's visit, and our school, dance school in London, we devised this, it was like working on a repertory dance piece, and we were going to perform it for the Pope. So that was interesting. It was my first time seeing Cardiff and thought, this is interesting, not knowing that I'd be coming back in a year's time and practically living here. So that was a lovely high for the school to represent. What other achievements of my dance career? Yes, I managed to meet up, and this is many years later, I met up with an ex-primary school friend, but we were together when we were in Weekends Art College, and he's a black writer. His sisters are filmmakers in London. His name was Derek Blackwood, but he changed his name to, gosh, I'm terrible with names, Amani Neftali. And he wrote this play called Ragamuffin, which was based on the Tottenham riots in, gosh, was that some of the 70s, I think. And I, at the time, was working here with a few dance companies, and I was also working with the opera here. But I needed to try something else. It was my first time at drama. So he said, June, come down. See, I need somebody who can dance and a little bit of acting and maybe possibly sing. I'm not sure. Come down on the audition. I thought, oh God, do I really want to be in London again? I thought, okay, I went down and auditioned. Got down to the last lot. Wasn't sure if I got through. He said, I'll give you a ring in a couple of weeks' time. Didn't hear anything from it and didn't think I got through. And then he rang up and said, Jim, we've got the part. I was thinking, oh no, how long is this job going to be for? He said, probably 3 months, but we'll be touring a few places in London. Then we'll go to Sheffield, Bristol, but you'll be right for the part. So it was a part playing a runaway slave, playing a court, clerk of court, playing a dance hall character, playing I can't remember the character name, but it was the old woman that was roughed up by the police. And the fifth character, I can't remember, there was a fifth character. But anyway, I played this character, and I didn't realise, maybe 4 weeks into rehearsal, that I was pregnant. So I had to keep that quiet until I got to the part where I had to play the part of the old woman that was being roughed up by the police. And then I had to say to him, like, and obviously they were a bit worried, but then they said it's fine. So I did the whole 3 months work on the tour, and for me that was like really quite challenging because I'd never had to sort of learn parts of these characters. I think the most challenging was being clerk of court, because he said to me, you do realise when you go into places like maybe Tottenham, they're not going to respond well to the way you speak, so you're going to have to adopt a West Indian accent. So I thought, really? Okay, fine. And he was right, because I had to go to, well, actually, we went to the area where it all happened. I can't remember the name of the place now, but and I had to say, all rise, all rise. The court will now preside over da 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 da, and nobody laughed. And then I had to turn around and go, get up off your backside. And then the whole place erupted with laughter. And then I thought, right, okay, I've got them. He was right. They don't want to hear this. They want to hear the lingo. And then from then on, it was fine. And that's what I had to do in every place that I went to. You know, I'd start off very formal, and then I'd break into the kind of West Indian banter. And sometimes you get people from the audience responding, and it kicked off then. And then for the runaway slave, I had to adopt a kind of a French accent, which was fun. It was a bit like allo, allo, allo. You know, when you go, you're speaking in a French accent and you're saying, César, César. And I remember César was my son, you know, I had to speak to him. And so that was great. There were some fun moments there, having to play these characters. And then I had to do a sort of Shango dance, which I was a bit worried because I was like 3 months pregnant. And they had a Brazilian guy to come and teach us really fast footwork. And so that was really good. And then I remember when we went to Birmingham, and some of the drummers wanted us to come back to the house, and they had this whole ritual thing before we go in. And he was so chuffed with the piece that he wanted us to come to his home, and he'd poured whiskey in the front of his door, and we all came in. He said, "This is what we do, welcome everybody in." And there was all this drumming up until 2 o'clock, and I was saying, "When the neighbours?" He said, "No. We just open all the windows, we just play." So there was that lovely welcoming thing, you know. So I think that was the real highlights of my just, you know, starting out and just, you know, taking on acting roles. And the second, I suppose, in my dancing career, again, my daughter was 5 years old, but I had to leave her in Cardiff, and that was a bit of a worry. But I got working with Phil Mackenzie, who now runs the Sherman Youth in Cardiff, and he was doing this production where he was using 14 dancers, also club dancers and possibly circus trained people, and he built this sort of theatre stroke dance piece around based on the depressions in the 1920s and 30s in the States, but juxtaposing trance music. I suppose it would have been in the late 80s, 90s. So the trance music scene that was here. So we were building that up, working it here, and then we went to Holland and travelled around Holland. And it had a very strange title called "We Want God Now," which is very strange, but it was a tiring piece, and it was loosely based on improvisation, but structured, and you'd have bottles of water along the side. It was lit, quite starkly lit, and from the moment it started, you just kept dancing until you dropped, and you'd get a stitch. You couldn't get off the stage. You had to keep going. They had a visual projector, and every now and then you can go off and get a drink of water, but you had to come back on. So that was interesting, having a feeling, my God, people in their 20s. People who had no money, this is how they had to earn their living. They were literally hanging or having to hold their partner. So we kind of experienced that, and we took it to Holland. It was appreciated in some places, not everywhere. But what was really interesting was that I can't remember which venue this was, but the culture of contemporary dance here, you don't often get flowers. You might get flowers in the opera when you perform, and you might have for a ballet company, but not for a contemporary. But in Holland, when we finished one performance, they came on and they gave a bouquet of flowers, 14 of us. We couldn't believe it. Very different way how they treat art there. It's respected art in whatever form. But again, it was quite trying. As a mother, I had to switch off and not think about my daughter, otherwise I couldn't have got through this. And when I did come back, and my daughter was a little bit kind of distant, and when I did ask her many years later, she said, yeah, she does remember that time. She just thought, I just didn't think you were coming back. I thought that was it. And from that time, I stopped touring then. I thought, no, this is not fair. I have to leave it and just take on work, more teaching, which is what I did. So that was probably about 1995, 96. Hen Walad Vamamai. That was an exciting project. How that came about was that my husband, Dylan Davis, he comes from a family. His father was from the Fros male voice choir, and they used to tour. And I think they went to the States at one point. Maybe around the time when they had the civil rights, he kind of went there. So there's always been that singing anyway in the Welsh culture and at home. And I always used to sing at home too in London, but it was mainly, I am jumping back a little bit, but the school I went to, Highgate School, we had a Welsh head teacher in Brookfield Junior School, Welsh headmaster, and we had a choir there. And we celebrated St David's Day, but I didn't know that it was St David's Day until I came here. We always had daffodils, didn't know why. I used to hate having daffodils. But we always had choir, and I hated choir because you had to sing before dinner, and you could smell all the food coming up. I suppose that's one way for us eating our food, but I hated it, and I hated learning details to song, all the words and the notes. But also my choir teacher was also my Sunday school teacher. So there was a kind of thread, and she was a lovely teacher, and we'd always have to sing to answer the register. It was never, yes, Miss Durham. We had to go, yes, Miss Durham, and play with notes, and she was also my recorder teacher. So there was that culture of singing there anyway. At home, because we had a piano, a very out of tune piano, I used to play by ear the piano, and I used to sing and make up songs, and so there was that kind of, and because I was quite a shy child, and we had a bit of a, traumatic home life in my teens, the only way of expressing myself, because I didn't really talk much, kept very much to myself, it was the dancing and the singing, and my sister and I, we kind of improvised. So there was that connection there, and also we made that connection, Dylan and I, when we were at Laban. So coming back to Cardiff now, my husband had a band when he was quite young and wanted to create a band when he was here, and S4C was quite new at the time, just started in the early 80s. They were looking for groups and things, so he met with a few other, I don't know how he met a few of the musicians, but they kind of got together like you do and they jam, and he would teach me a few things in Welsh or songs. So when we were together, I'd always do the backing. I always thought, I'd like to do backing singing. So I learnt songs phonetically. I couldn't speak Welsh, but I learnt them and did a few gigs with him, and also a few television slots. They had, I can't remember what they were called anyway, but we did a couple of those. And I'm trying to think of the guy now. It's not Chris Moyne. Something Moyne. He had seen quite a few musicians and music directors had seen me with my husband's band, and in Sign they had had this kind of world music project going on, and invited me to come up to their studios in Sign, and just to listen to a few tracks and just to see if I could just improvise. And just play around, and they'd invited other musicians, some of the other songwriters, or some from England, and obviously some from Wales. So I listened to quite a few of them and improvised on quite a lot of them, and that's how I kind of got involved in that one. And they also had another company that they were working with, which was the Afro Celt in England. So then that's how I got involved in that, but then not singing, which was a drag, because that would have been lovely, but just dancing in that one. So that's how I got involved making that one. They played the CD to Simon Emerson of Afro Celt. They loved it, wanted me on board, and another group from Liverpool, but not as singers, as performers, because they must have heard, that she dances as well. We were always hoping that we can get a bit of singing in, but no, they knew what they wanted. So we did that, and we went to Caceres in Spain and did the WOMAD gig there with them. And then we did the gig in Reading, and that was brilliant. Of course, when Peter Gabriel came on stage, we were so full of it. We didn't realise, he's the guru. We should have backed up and just acknowledged him, but we were so carried away, dancing in the front. We didn't get asked again. So we'd blown that. But it was a lovely experience. So that's how I got involved doing with I can't remember his name, which is really annoying. It's not Chris Moyne, something Moyne anyway. Yeah, he'd be knocked if he heard this. He'd be really annoyed. Got your surname? Yeah. So that's how I got involved. I do like singing, but I think I quite like making sounds. I like experimenting with vocals. So I mean, if one day No Fit State wanted some sort of vocal arrangement, I wouldn't mind doing something like that. But I'm not really into learning. I don't like learning the songs, the words to the songs. But that's how I've got involved. Right. Teaching came about purely by accident, because when I was trained as a dancer, I didn't really want to do any teaching or choreographing. It was just pure performing. When I came to Cardiff, I didn't have my equity card, which is like a union card, so you can work on TV, you can work with the opera. So really what I was doing, I was teaching at Chapter Art Centre, which really, I can't remember who the director at the time, but he often used to let newcomers kind of use the space. They didn't charge you for the hire of the space, which is really good when you're just starting out, because you haven't really got money anyway. Rubicon, through that, Ian Ferguson, who used to run Jumpers, also had a youth group in the Sherman. He also got me on board teaching the students there, or their group, and also Rubicon Dance. So it was kind of word of mouth, and I also taught at the College of Music and Drama, but my first was Chapter, and I was absolutely petrified, because I had to suddenly think about my training. What could I remember in order to devise the lesson plan? I mean, we had no experience whatsoever, so I had to kind of think about, literally parrot fashion, what my teachers taught me, and then try and transpose that with difficulty, because then I had to then learn how to break things down, because it's quite complex what I've been taught, and my body's trained for that, can build with the stamina and the endurance, and beginners can't. So it was a pattern of really breaking it down and learning how to speak and also cope with anyone asking questions. So that was a period of time. But when I saw people improving, and then I thought, oh, actually, this is good. I enjoy this. And then it kind of developed from there. So then I would keep going back to London and try and do a few classes and try and remember. But literally, it was like trying to remember stuff from way back. And also from Weekends Art College, their training in jazz. So I mainly delivered jazz classes, which I kind of do today. And today I still teach at Rubicon, a full-time dance course, and I teach at Cardiff Metropolitan. They have a 3-year BA dance course there. I teach on there, and I'm available to do choreography. I work with lots of different theatre companies if they ask me to choreograph, or any sort of community work. Now, regards with the carnival, I started going to carnival I saw carnival by accident. I think the first one I saw in the bay, where it was staged, and it was in the field, and to me that kind of felt very different. I enjoyed it. It felt very different, but I was used to the carnival in London, where it kind of processed through the street and everybody joins in. So it was okay looking at it, but it was quite frustrating, because I thought, how do you get involved in this? So so I hadn't seen that up for a while. And what happened was, I was going shopping one year in town and saw this amazing procession of music and dance, which looked like carnival. And I thought, God, that's like London. Wow, how on earth do people get involved? Didn't find out. Didn't really know how to get involved there. But I think, again, it was another couple of years until I bumped into somebody else, and I can't remember who it was. And they brought me along to this place in Catay's Terrace. And I think that's where they used to have the campus. And it was found it quite odd and quite sort of weird, very strange people. Hadn't twigged it was the same group, same kind of thing that was going on in the procession a couple of years back. And but then as I kept going to it, that's right, because I think it was Jane Bellamy who used to teach it, who used to run Rubicon, who got me involved actually, because she was one of the dance leaders there. And I thought, this is actually great, because my daughter was an only child then, and I thought it'd be great for her to go along, and mum and daughter, and I saw other mothers and their children and what have you, so I got involved in that. And it just wonderful just seeing Fionn enjoying herself. So I thought, this is something that I can do, and being at home and not doing a lot of work, that we could get involved in that. 3 weeks, committed to something, and then you can just dance on the streets and go crazy, let off some steam, which is something that one needs to do. So I did that for a number of years, and then I'd seen an ad that Steve Fletcher, because he was the actual leading the carnival now, that they were looking for dance coordinators for the Swansea, because they were starting carnival in Swansea. And at that time I was doing a lot of teaching anyway, and just started doing community work, but not a lot. And I thought it'd be quite interesting to see how they actually do this. So I wrote off and explained what I was doing, and saying, would it be possible to try this work as a coordinator? And he said yes, but it's in Swansea. So that was a tricky one, having to make the journey, because from getting up early in the morning, and I thought, could I take my daughter? So I was working here full time with them, but staying there 3 days a week in Swansea, and then having to travel from Cardiff to Swansea. And that was a real eye-opener, and I think it was quite enjoyable for my daughter, because then I could just let loose, make new friends, and I would just learn about how you organise run carnival under director of other dance coordinators. So yes, that's how I got involved in that, and that's what I'm still doing now. And actually my daughter is going to be having a go at being a coordinator as well, just for her now. She's finished her training. So it's quite hard work. It's it's a long day, long hours, lots of people asking you questions here and there, and you're having to, it does try your patience. You're having to find ways of saying, just hold on for 5 minutes, I'll be back with you, and then you run off and deal with 6 other people, come back, remember, come back and deal with, also making sure that everyone's welcome. So you've got to do quite a lot of things. You've got to make sure everybody's welcome, and dealing with there may be people who are a bit difficult, but you still have to deal with that. People that are really friendly and helpful, people who are impatient, people who are willing to take on more, dealing with disability. Also choreography, you've got to choreograph something that suits, that people feel comfortable doing. And you've got to choreograph, you have to work with, you can't think about what you'd like to do always. It's almost like, how would this group look their best? And making them feel good. So a lot of the choreography might be very simple but effective. You might have another group that wants to do a lot more, and maybe you don't have you don't have the kind of dance style that they like. So you might ask them, well, what do you like doing best? And incorporate that so they feel that they have ownership as well. And so maybe they've got all their moves they want to do. They don't like what you do. So you let them do that, and then you just say, well, let's have a look at processing that now, because that might be a bit difficult. It's very static and you might need to move that, so you have to help them how to move it along, and then they might see, oh, that doesn't work, that, so they make changes as well. So that's very good. And also you might encourage people that maybe mothers sometimes lose a lot of confidence, but they get them to get involved. Maybe they can decorate their push chairs. Once they know their kids can join as well, then again, they get involved. And it's also a way of everyone meeting up. They see the same people each year, so it becomes, it's like Christmas. They see people they haven't seen all year round, that they may not really the same social group, but once they meet in Carnival, it's like, oh, they're so-and-so again. So it's a really interesting way of people networking, and they may have certain, especially if they come from different cultures, they may have certain views about certain people, but actually when they start sitting down and gluing sequences on together and talking to them, they may be aware of, oh, I didn't know this, or I might try this then. And so that's what it does in a way. People just see this big place that looks chaotic, full of mess, lots of music blaring, but after a while you get used to the different sounds, and it's getting you to listen to be accepting of different musics, different cultures, being around lots of children that you may not necessarily be around, and not a lot of people like being around lots of little kids. So but it also, again, it might, because it does include a lot of people, at the same time you do have to be aware that there may be people that you have to keep an eye on, that maybe that shouldn't be around certain people. So again, we are sort of trained to keep an eye about that. So again, we do have community police that's there to kind of step in. So people shouldn't be here. So yeah, it's busy, it's full on, and you do have to wear several hats. And yeah, at the end of it, you think, phew, that's over. But it was rewarding, and many years it's been raining, so you just get on with it. Yeah, a lot. I can say it's been beneficial for me. My parents at the time when I was 13 to about 17, didn't really have a good teenage time. My mum was very sickly. I used to have to look after my mother. My father wasn't always there, so it was quite disruptive in the home, which means that when you're growing up, you lose a lot of confidence. You don't have, if you have to look after your mother, sometimes you keep those things to yourself. You go to school and you're just surviving. So really, the arts are really important, because dance is a way of bringing, you sort of feel like you can, if you have an interest in dance, something that you can succeed in. It also brings you in contact with other people and just brings you out of your shell. Same with art, same with drama or singing and music. Children sort of develop differently in different art forms. For me, looking back, if I didn't do that, I don't think I'd be where I am today, because it gives you an inner confidence, even though you might feel that you're failing in other areas. And as a teacher, I can see, and I will often notice the children that have problems. So I will naturally, wouldn't always have a chat with them, but I'm kind of careful in trying to draw out their inner, to build up their confidence. So that's really important, and saying, and also tell them, just because I'm standing here and I seem quite confident, I was once somebody like you. I didn't speak to anybody. I didn't have much eye contact. I was bullied. I stuttered. I said, you can be confident. You can be, it's okay to be different. You don't have to follow the crowd just because you wear flat shoes and sensible clothing, or just because you speak a certain way. You don't have to go with the flow. You can be very different. It's the same thing I instilled in my daughter. And, you don't, there are things that you can do outside. You may not have friends in school. You may have friends in a different place. Maybe you go to music lessons. You have friends there. Maybe not at school. So it's really important that these things happen as well outside of school, as well as in, that you don't just have the friends in school. You have friends outside that can empower you, and whether you go there twice a week, once a week. If you're in a class on your own, it's okay if you go to the library and you read on your own if you don't have friends there, or there's other things that can build your interest. So it's really important, and I think the arts are important. I don't think in some schools, if they don't have enough funding, it's not given enough importance. It helps. I was teaching on a Sparks project in Newport. The schools can't afford to buy in or maybe lead some of the lessons in school, and a lot of the parents as well may be suffering from depression. They may have drink problems. They may not have time to read to their kids, but these projects help the kids. Sparks project, run by Riverfront Arts, would buy in teachers to teach felt making, drama, filmmaking. They do rap, they would do dance, and those kids would have 2 hours of our time. And at the end of the day, those kids go away reciting something. And what's sad sometimes is that when I go back on the bus home, because I don't drive, is the kids will be reciting something and you get one of the parents going, oh, be quiet. And you think, what a shame. That kid has felt like 10 feet tall, because maybe at home they'll get told to go out and play, or don't bother me, or the parents might crack a lager and they don't have time. But they have developed through that. Their attention span at school, the teachers have often said that the kids they're a nuisance in class, and especially the naughty ones are the ones that have been totally focused, that have listened, that they're the ones that want to play the drums, the ones that want to stand up or who have remembered the poem and they cannot believe it. And so that's telling you something. It's really important, and it doesn't matter what background they're from, what culture. All kids are like sponges and they want to learn something, and that gives them confidence, because they think, well, I can do this. I'm not being told I'm stupid all the time, either at home or by the teacher. I'm not stupid because I've done this. And I think that's really important, because you get put down. I mean, when I was at primary school, I had one teacher who was a New Zealand teacher, very small teacher, and I always noticed she always targeted the kids that came from ethnic backgrounds. Would either get smacked by her. In the 60s they could smack you, and I always had my hand up, because my mum said I was always quite bright, and she'd always say, put your hands down and ask somebody else, which after a while I didn't put my hands up, and you sort of begin to feel that you're not worth anything. And so those things are really important. So if I didn't have good teachers in other areas, I wouldn't have had something inside me saying, well, I know I'm good at this, but with that particular teacher, she doesn't think much of me. Okay, well. So I think it's really important. Wow, for me, it's I'm not saying that I would have been depressed, but I think maybe when I was young that I was possibly going through depression. It's kept me positive, and it's something that even as I'm getting older, that I know that I can't really stop. I know that if there comes a point where I retire, I will still be active. I think it's important to be active, and that I will join. Either I'll join different groups doing stuff. It's important to get out of the house, meet other people. There's that kind of community thing. So if I wasn't doing carnival, I know I'll be joining another group, or I might create another group. And it's just keeping busy and staying positive. Even if you have no money or no work, you need to get out and do things. Keeping fit as you get older, it's that whole thing of being mentally staying alert, communicating with people, staying healthy, eating well, and just that whole thing of community. Because I don't have family here, so I need to keep that. I need to be with, form different groups, whether it be singing, dancing, acting. I think we need to do that, and especially at this economic time where, arts are getting cut. There isn't anything for people to do, and I think it's a case of it's got to. I think I'll always be doing something artistic. I think the Welsh people are very warm. And I think a lot of people outside say this. I think once being an outsider, I think once they accept you, and that's regardless of whether they are Welsh from 10 generations or if it's their parents have come from different places, there is that general warmth and community-ness about it, and that they kind of rally round and help, which you don't see in London unless you are part of a group or tight clique. I mean, they are cliquey, but I think once you're embraced into that community, it's kind of there. People help you. Yeah. How they benefit? I think it's actually really important and interesting. I think stories are interesting for obviously people going in to see paintings or different things. I think if there's an area which is talking about stories and how people lived or memories, I think I think it's important because our lives are changing as we move into sort of technology. Older generations are dying off. I think that's really interesting. I think also, even on television, we have a spate of programs where people are interested in finding out their ancestry, or people. The programs like "Who Do You Think You are interesting. People want to know how people live, where they came from. There's another one called, another program that's recently been out, and it's to do with the workhouse. How did people live? So I think there's a general interest that's kind of feeding through and affecting a lot of people. People are nosy. They want to know, well, how did they? They may not always want to know about different people's cultures, but I think if it's available and it's alongside different cultures, people will naturally, there'll be one or two inquisitive alongside photographs and pictures. They may not know, was there a black community? How long ago was there a black community here? I think people will be interested, and the younger people who are mixing more, listening to different cultures and music and fashion, and they're more likely to, they want to know, they're interested. I think it's important.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Really,
you.
really